This was the quote from Nancy Pelosi. I mean, this is not how I anticipated starting our conversation, but I just think we're having fun right now. So in the New Yorker today, Pelosi said about Biden, "I've never been that impressed with his political operation," she admitted. "They won the White House. Bravo. But my concern was this ain't happening, and we have to make a decision for this to happen. The president has to make a decision for that to happen." So, like, that's amazing to see because you, Josh, have long been critical of Biden as a politician. His political acumen has been overstated in your estimation. Can you give a sense of why you feel that way and why someone like Pelosi may feel that way?
Yeah, this my dog went into the background. You can say hi to her, everybody. Yeah. I don't know why she went exactly in the camera, but hello. We see you.
She's so sweet.
Yeah, she's the best. But yeah, that was very vindicating to read because like I had, and like this was kind of like the through line that I followed for basically a year. I had always been kind of agnostic towards like the Biden administration, like following politics, like with the 2022 midterms. And after that, I didn't think they were like particularly like great master politicians, but I didn't like see them as particularly inept either. Like I was willing to sort of believe that their low approval ratings were just because of inflation that was out of their control. I didn't really like how they handled Congress, but they passed those bills. This was before October 7th. So like their foreign policy record was Ukraine, which was like give or take, like I guess that was an accomplishment. But then I got this book around the middle of 2023 called The Last Politician by Franklin Foer, and it was a very like kind of like positive book towards him. It was one of these Biden biographies that they published like around 2023 that like they actually like sold very poorly, which is why we haven't seen Biden biographies lately, but like which is a little disappointing. I'd like one over like the past couple of weeks, but hopefully that'll come eventually. Pelosi actually did say she would write a book about the past month or so, which I'm really looking forward to. I hope she stays around for that.
Me too.
But yeah, but this book basically was supposed to be, the thesis of it was that we live in this era of gridlock where the politicians are kind of just showmen and like just fodder for the parties, and people just went off of polarization and everybody just wants to become celebrities. But Biden is, as in the words of the title, the last politician, and he has this ancient like lost art of politics skill set that he uses to get things done that people considered impossible. And I just kind of skimmed through it, and I went to the part about the 2022 midterms, which is where the race like sort of ends. And I was curious as to like kind of how he said they thought about it. And what I read was really alarming because what like they said wasn't like, oh, this was about abortion, this was about Republicans being too extreme. They saw the 2022 midterm results as a vindication of them, like literally their administration. They thought people were voting for Democrats in like Michigan and Pennsylvania that year, not because they were running against insane abortion fanatics or people who want like people to have to get children after being raped. They thought it was because like people appreciated them being more moderate on abortion. Like you may remember that Elizabeth Warren pushed for like using federal land to set up abortion clinics. They explicitly rejected that, and they thought that the reason they won was because they rejected that. They took personal credit for these like victories that other Democrats did that happened in spite of them.
But
like
his
that
approval
was their
rating was super low, and everyone, and you, this is why people need to subscribe to your newsletter. Like my predictions about this election would not have been as good if I hadn't been reading your work. Like truly, you do the work on this. Like Biden's approval rating was low at this point.
Yeah, it was.
It didn't recover after the Afghanistan withdrawal. I mean, who knows if that's causal? I don't think it is. I think it was just more like, you know, the COVID benefits and like the child tax credit began to expire, and there were no more stimulus checks and things like that, and people's purchasing power was affected. Like rent has never been higher in this country. So I think a lot, and his inability to like lead, and then eventually, of course, the support for the genocide. But
yeah,
how did those numbers not translate when we're seeing like generic Democrat polling much better than Biden, specifically his approval rating being low, and yet his team was somehow convinced that it was his politics and policies driving the success for Democrats?
Yeah, it got to really absurd extents. Like they took credit after Andy Beshear won. Like in 2023, like Andy Beshear won his race after he led in polling the entire time and was expected to win. They said, oh, you guys like you never expected Democrats could do well, and we just won more elections. Like they held the state legislator in Virginia, and they won the Kentucky's governor's race. The Kentucky's governor's race was because Kentucky had like a bunch of tornadoes and a cave-in and Bashir was there, and people thought that he was like a strong leader for natural disasters. It had nothing to do with Biden at all, but they were taking credit for these things, and it was just setting up this kind of like storybook narrative about how like this kind of superstition about how they were always underestimated, how they always came back, that wasn't based on any like empirical data at all. It was just this kind of shoddily crafted, disingenuous sort of thing. And it was really concerning to me because I thought they were just like trying to just cover for like something that was really concerning there, or something that wasn't convincing. But from what we've seen since he dropped out, they may have like sincerely just not have believed in polling. Like supposedly they hadn't conducted internal polls for months. When they got the polling data showing how badly they were running in all of these states that like everybody else was seeing for weeks at that point, it was news to them. Like according to like what the reporting is on this, like this, they weren't aware that they were like on track to actually lose. They told themselves after the 2022 midterms that polling was wrong, which it wasn't. Polling that year was correct. The punditry was wrong. Like the polling actually did show Democrats winning in all the states that they won and having a close race for the House. It never showed that. It never showed a red wave. That was just pundits overthinking it and over kind of assuming stuff about the election. But like the Biden people created this narrative that was part of this larger kind of narcissistic narrative around Biden's larger life story about how he's always been counted out and how he always comes back. And it just like created this kind of like castle of superstition and just like disingenuity that they lived in. And it like eventually you saw it like it was not, I mean, it probably could have been sustainable, which is the scary part. It took the earliest debate in history for it to really like kind of like for push to come to shove. But it did, so thank God for that.
So can you reconcile the fact that Kamala Harris is running like very successfully right now, in part, though, I think just due to the fact that she is the generic Democrat that we've been hoping for,
something
right?
Closer to that. I don't think she's exactly that. I do think, like, right now, like, I still have my doubts about Kamala. I don't like think she was the ideal candidate. I had my list that I made of all the prospective candidates, and she was closer to the bottom because she's never been particularly popular. She's not electorally proven in the way that pretty much every other Democrat was. It was interesting following the Veep stakes because you had like all like these contenders for like the number 2 position, and across the board, they all had far more successful records for president and for running a presidential campaign than Kamala herself did. Like you had Shapiro, who won by 17, 15 points in Pennsylvania. You had Kelly, who won back-to-back victories in Arizona. Walz won in a red district for 10 years, and he won 2 elections like in a purplish state. Like Bashir won in Kentucky. Like all of these contenders had like more solid, proven records at the ballot box than Kamala does. And I think there is still something of a gap between how she's polling and how someone like Bob Casey or Tammy Baldwin or Ruben Gallego is polling. But like that gap has narrowed because the difference between like her and one of those more generic Democrats is a lot less, like it's not as wide of a difference as it was between with Biden between them. Because with Biden, there was a very, very strong question of competence that he just could not get over. You had 85% of the public thinking he was too old to do the job. I do think that, like, going back to what the cause of his disapproval was, I personally do see the Afghanistan collapse as a turning point because his reputation that he kind of traded off of in 2020 was that he was this elder statesman, like very experienced figure who could like get things working again, and that did not like. That was what that was what people were hopeful about. And then you have this like foreign policy debacle happen under him. And that really takes the sheen off and it paints everything else in a very poor light. So like this old person with a record of failure, people don't think can run, like is going to be stuck. And his numbers were very, very stagnant against Trump, which was the scary part. For like about a year after October 7th, his numbers were consistently behind Trump's. With Kamala, there's like more kind of, people are I don't think they're necessarily settled on her, but there's the perceptions of her are not nearly as baked in as something as solid as like this person is too old and they're not getting any younger. People have concerns about Kamala not having accomplishments. They have concerns about her not being experienced or maybe being too liberal, and like which probably is just derived more from like her persona and her background than it is her actual policy statements. But like that is that's more malleable, and that people can like kind of brush those concerns aside a lot more easily than they could have with age. So we're kind of like the better version of somebody running with the Biden record. It's not exactly the ideal you would see for a Democrat totally disconnected from that record, which I personally always saw as the ideal. But like you're getting rid of a lot of difficulties that were impossible to get rid of with Biden, and it's just that might be enough. It looks like that could be enough. It looks like that will be enough.
Right. And to your point, you know, if it was someone completely disconnected from the unpopularity of the Biden administration, we'd have a very different race as it relates to Israel and Palestine and what she's dealing with right now, even though in the end, I think it's difficult for us to understand how little I think a lot of voters like have that affect them. But I am curious though, like, you know, you talk about how the Biden campaign didn't believe in polling. Harris inherited that entire campaign infrastructure, and Jen O'Malley Dillon stayed on as one of the top people on that campaign. Can you just define the difference between Biden's like extremely old and associated with the family inner circle versus the campaign infrastructure, and why Harris has been able to use that same campaign infrastructure to have much more success?
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's necessarily because of her campaign infrastructure. I wrote about this in an article I published earlier this week, kind of laying out how she could win. And it's just for as successful as her rollout has been, I think that's more of just a fact of the circumstances than a fact of her accomplishments or the accomplishments of her campaign. She is getting a positive reception right now, partially because she has delivered good speeches and like press the case in a way that's compelling to people and gets attention. But it's fundamentally she is giving people what they want. What people have always wanted this year was a younger, new figure to bring the country past the Biden-Trump years of really old people who they regard as failures on either side. This wasn't necessarily related to ideology. They would be happy with a younger liberal. They would have been happy with a younger conservative. You had Shapiro leading Trump by 10 points in Pennsylvania. You had a Haley leading Biden by 20 points nationally, I think, in one poll. People just fundamentally wanted like just a new figure. And she's not the perfect example of that because she's the sitting vice president, but she is that to a far greater degree than Biden was. So it's people kind of, I think her success has been people kind of reading in what they want to believe about her because people are so desperate for like a sense of hope. They're willing to give her like a benefit of the doubt. Moderates will look at her and kind of see, oh, this is like kind of like a moderate liberal figure, like that I can get behind. Left-wing people will look at her and like see her as somebody who may be more sympathetic to their concerns than Biden was and has a more kind of like a better background than him, like as like this 50-year corporate senator. It'll be tricky for her to kind of, I don't know, like, I mean, I don't know if it'll necessarily be impossible to thread that needle or for it even really be hard. People just kind of want her to be what they want her to be so badly now that I think she'll get a lot of leeway. But we haven't really seen the rubber hit the road in terms of like her having to make like big campaign decisions. And I can't say I'm too enthusiastic with how she's kept that team together. There's some really crazy anecdotes that I read that show that pretty much anything could be an improvement just to return to a basic campaign organization. I think there was a story that Mike Donilon, one of Biden's like many senior advisors, was essentially the entire ad team himself. They wrote that like he would come up with ideas for ads on his own. He would pitch it to some guy, and then they would use like this $300 million campaign. They would just make the ads based off of what this one guy thought of.
Like, they'd also spent like no money on ads in the lead up to, I mean, they were trailing, sorry. They did in all the swing states, but it was, I think, digital that they weren't. And that makes sense.
Yeah,
it's this old guy.
Nothing on Facebook. That was like a big difference.
The determinations. But in terms of, let me just ask you about what you think about her selecting Tim Walz then, because that seems to me a much more left-friendly pick than I've seen in my lifetime for vice president. Like I said this earlier, if Clinton were running for president right now, honestly, either Hillary or Bill, they would have picked Josh Shapiro and then tweeted 100%. Out like a mocking. They would have mocked the left and made a thing out of it and then gone to a corporate fundraiser and use that to get some checks. So this is like, I think, a good sign. What's your assessment of it? And if you could talk about Walz a little bit.
Yeah, Walz kind of did like I have an interesting history with him because I was a big Whitmer pusher very early on just to kind of prove a point to people. She was always my kind of platonic ideal of like a generic Democrat. So when she was passing all those laws in 2023, I would always be like, this is what we could have if not for like Biden insisting on staying in the race. Because I was really big on Biden dropping out. Like, I think like as early as April 2023, I was like making arguments about that. I was in this for the long haul. And Whitmer was my big kind of example I used for like how you could be more successful. But Walz at the same time also had his majority. And I have a lot of followers, a lot of readers from Minnesota, an alarming amount of readers from Minnesota. They would always like go up to me in my replies and just always point out like, no, Walz is better. Walz did this, Walz did that. Like, you're sleeping on Walz. Like, you need to get Walz pilled. I'm like, and I just like got kind of annoyed and contrarian about it. I was like, shut up. I don't care about him. He looks like he's 80 years old. I would like made like some like tweet, like making fun of them saying they were NPCs. But like, so that kind of like left me sort of like polarized against him. So when I made my list, he was kind of an afterthought for me. I put him like in like C tier, like kind of like, I didn't really see what like kind of the idea was. I had him ahead of Pete. I
love that you have the same fixation on rankings that I do.
Yeah, I do.
Categorize our minds. Okay, go on.
Yeah, but so I like really, he was just kind of like an example of me, like, oh, this guy's, I guess he's qualified, but he doesn't come from like a swing state. And like, I guess like there wouldn't be anything wrong with him, but I thought that it wouldn't really add anything to the campaign that like someone like Beshear or Cooper or Whitmer could, or Shapiro initially I was kind of intrigued by before like all the scandals came out, and I was like, okay, we're done with this. And Callie also like having his terrible record. But then like Whitmer says she's not running. Cooper bows out of the race. Beshear kind of flops on TV, and Walz is sort of like does his very successful push. And he sort of like takes that slot as like the non-centrist, electable sort of middle of the road Democrat that like I feel like Cooper or Beshear or Whitmer could have if they either like wanted to try in the case of Cooper or Whitmer, or they were actually good at television in the case of Beshear. So he kind of takes that spot that I always saw as the ideal pick for her by default, while Shapiro and Callie are like kind of running to as far to the right as possible. There's like all this stuff going on out about there. Not really that like Shapiro, but I mean like he refuses to apologize for that terrible racist essay he wrote when he was 20 years old. And so like I kind of really warm up to him as like kind of the pick that makes the most sense. And so I write this article about him. I try to kind of temper expectations. He does have that history of success in rural areas, so his persona does bring results to a certain degree, like people expect. But since he's gone statewide and run for governor, that appeal is diminished. Part of that's due to polarization, and he couldn't really do much about it. But it does show that like there is kind of like a waning effect here. He's not like the same politician he was when he was winning his district by 30 points in 2008. But
it also made him more left and more liberal and governing in that particular way. Like, what do you think this says about the incentive structure for Kamala Harris and who she should be appealing to? I also like the fact that he's a congressional veteran that has some ties to Congress, and even our new friend Nancy Pelosi was pushing for him, in part because I think she actually wants to get a domestic agenda through Congress, and he's by far the most beneficial person based on like anyone from AOC to Joe Manchin is saying they like this dude. I mean, this is, if she wants an agenda passed, he could actually help. Yeah,
just through that experience. But it also shows, I think, and this is the most encouraging part of the pick for me, beyond the fact that I think he's good electorally and is a good speaker. It's ironic because I think he was kind of picked to a certain degree, that, like, so he wouldn't outshine her. But I think just watching the speech they gave yesterday and in Philadelphia, I think he's a better public speaker than she is. He's like, I think he already kind of outshines her, even though he's not trying to. I think he would obviously be a better person at the top of the ticket, just like for a fresh start in that respect. But like, there's nothing. She's really kind of unaccomplished electorally, so anybody I think would have kind of upstaged her in that respect. But the thing that was the most encouraging to me is that, according I think to the New York Times, a thing that attracted her to Walz was that he does have that record of passing a lot of progressive legislation that she supposedly wanted to be her own legacy and her priorities in Congress. And the big thing with Walz and Whitmer, at least for me, like back in 2023, where there was a lot of kind of discussion and despair over like the rotating villain theory, or like how committed are liberals even to like these boilerplate parts of their agenda, Walz does show that they were at least willing to walk on that, and like really like do a lot of work with a very small majority, like political. He said that his philosophy is to burn political capital instead of hoarding it, which is the opposite of the Rahm Emanuel sort of view of politics in a way that I think is really encouraging. But the fact that Kamala sees his kind of politics as a model of the politics of actually passing things and leaving a legacy, compared to the Shapiro or Kelly kind of politics of just playing to the middle as much as you can and trying to just win elections without doing much with it, I think that like reflects kind of positively towards her mindset. And I think that like that is a good choice if she does intend on actually getting those policies passed.
I totally agree with you. I think it's a party-wide shift too, because Sam often describes Biden as a cipher for the Democratic Party. I think she's more of a cipher, and I think
they both are.
But he has like obsessive Zionism like as an ideology. He's the credit card senator.
He's also not there
mentally. I mean, that's part of the issue. Like, she's more of a cipher in the way that I think is more positive, to be honest. But we're running a short on time, so I just had to get your thoughts on Shapiro and that implosion. Like, the spin that he took himself out of the race is hilarious to me. It's hilarious. It's like I didn't break up. You didn't break up with me. I broke up with you. And all these pro-Obama pundits, he's clearly associated with like that consulting class of folks, coming out and essentially saying, they just didn't see eye to eye on the role, as opposed to, and he maybe wanted to continue his term in Pennsylvania. Like, what were his upsides? He didn't. His candidacy was sunk by a series of scandals that included anti-Palestinian racism, a buried
sexual
murder
harassment
case.
Scandal in his office also. Sexual that was the thing that really made me like, okay, this is it.
Or was it anti-Semitism, Josh?
No, it was it was sexual. Oh yeah. But yeah, that was all unexplained. It is kind of funny because you see all these right-wing pundits are like visibly kind of pissed off that she didn't go with him, like trying to see like, oh, like how are they not choosing this good pick who would have won them the election, when it's clear, like it's really obvious they just wanted to talk about that murder case from now until November. So I think she dodged a bullet in that respect. I don't want to like deny Shapiro's political talents. I know he's an Obama impersonator, but like not everybody could win by 15 points in Pennsylvania. There is something there, but I don't like agree with him on policy. I think Walz, like you can make the electoral argument for him. He's certainly like somebody who I'd vastly prefer to be a president one day compared to Shapiro, even though Walz says he is not interested in that. I mean, I guess we'll see. There's also a story that said he was preparing for this opportunity for 13 months. Which is something kind of curious to do if you're that unambitious. So I don't know about Walz 2032, but I'd prefer that over Shapiro 2032, definitely.
Definitely, and he would still be younger than Trump, I think. He's got
2016. Walz is like 60.
Yeah. Walz is 60. He just looks older, right? And he has a funny anecdote about how you lose all your hair when you're a public school teacher, but exactly, right. We're in a much better position. Absolutely, he'd be 68 in 2032. It's
not the worst thing in the world.
No, not the worst thing in the world. Shapiro, it's just like the other lie that was pissing me off was that his Israel policy is no different than that of the other candidates. I heard that over and over. Anytime the criticism would come up on cable news, the anchor would say it, specifically on CNN. That's a lie. That's just a lie. It's a complete lie. Shapiro volunteered in the IDF, wrote an anti-Palestinian racist article back when he was in college.
Proposed to his wife in Jerusalem.
Was coming out against Ben and Jerry's, refusing to
he enforced anti-BDS laws. Most liberal Zionists won't even go up to bat for anti-BDS laws.
Yes.
It's like he had like tweets talking about how like Netanyahu was like this great leader, and that was in 2011. Netanyahu was going against Obama administration policy there. That was, if you're like a good Democrat who supports your president, then you do not back like a foreign leader who's going against your own country's policy. The only other person who did that at the time was Joe Biden, and I guess that's why he liked him so much. So yeah, that would have been really unfortunate because he definitely would have run for president eventually. And so I feel like we dodged it because these VP picks do matter. At this point, we're on Obama's VP's VP, and it's like there's like a real chance we could be on Obama's VP's VP, like in 2028 or 2032. Well, definitely 2032, 2028 is not going to be competitive if Kamala wins. But like these things do matter. Like it's kind of scary how consequential it could have been. And I think we definitely landed on one of the better outcomes. I still, like I'm sad, it wasn't Whitmer, though. I think that would have worked. But
I know,
whatever.
well, I know, but that's too much estrogen.
Yeah,
so,
too much girl boss power. America would have been scared.
You're right. All right. Well, Josh, everyone, please read Ettingermentum. It's on Substack. We will put a link to that below. Thanks so much for coming on today. Really
no, it's great. It's my pleasure.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.